Table of Contents, this file. Part E, Grounds for Contract Termination, Section 71. 4. 1 to 71. 4. 5. Part F, Procedures for Termination, including Takeover of Contracts, Section 71. 4. 6. Part U, Completion, Acceptance, and the Certificates. Part G, Warranty, Section 90. Part W, Final Payment, Retention Money, and Release of Securities. Part Z, When does accounts payable to a contractor actually arise? This is File 3 of a 5-file guide covering the full contract life cycle under RA No. 12009, File 1, Award, Eligibility, and Commencement, Parts A, B, C, R, T, File 2, Contract Implementation, Money, Time, and Changes, Parts D, V, S, Q, Y, File 4, Disputes, Protests, and Reconsideration, Parts H, I, J, 10, File 5, Prohibited Acts, Contract Terms, and Reference, Parts K, L, M, N, O, P. Next slide. Grounds for Contract Termination. Legal basis, of RA No. 12009, Section 71. 4. 1 to 71. 4. 5. Next slide. Termination for breach of contract, A. Goods and, C. Consulting services. This is based on of RA No. 12009, Section 71. 4. 1. A. and C. It states, A. In contracts of goods, the procuring entity may terminate for breach of contract when the supplier fails to deliver or perform any or all of the goods within the period, S, specified in the contract, or within any extension thereof granted by the procuring entity, pursuant to a request made by the supplier prior to the delay. And such failure amounts to at least 10% of the contract price, consistent with the provision of this on liquidated damages. C. In contracts for consulting services, the procuring entity may terminate for breach of contract when the consultant fails to deliver or perform the outputs and deliverables within the period specified in the contract. And such failure amounts to at least 10% of the contract price. Please take note of this specific rule when reviewing procurement documents. Next slide. Termination for breach of contract, B. Infrastructure, Conditions 1 to 5. This is based on of RA No. 12009, Section 71. 4. 1. B. It states, B. In contracts of infrastructure projects, the procuring entity shall terminate the contract for breach thereof when any of the following conditions are present. 1. Due to the contractor's fault and while the project is ongoing, it has incurred negative slippage of 15%, or more in accordance with Presidential Decree 1870, S. 1983, 2, due to the contractor's fault and after the contract time has expired, it has incurred a negative slippage of 10%, or more in the completion of the work. 3, the contractor abandons the contract works, plainly demonstrates an intention not to continue the performance of the contractor's obligations under the contract, refuses or fails to comply with the procuring entity's instructions, or fails to proceed expeditiously and without delay despite a written notice by the procuring entity. 4. When the contractor, without reasonable excuse, fails to comply with the notice of rejection given by the project engineer within 30 days after receiving the said notice. 5. The contractor does not actually have on the project site the minimum essential equipment listed on the bid necessary to prosecute the works in accordance with the approved work plan and equipment deployment schedule as required for the project. This is an important requirement to check during a compliance review. Next slide. Termination for breach of contract, B. Infrastructure, Conditions 6 to 9. This is based on of RA No. 12009, Section 71. 4. 1. B. Continued. It states, 6. The contractor does not execute the works in accordance with the contract or persistently or flagrantly neglects to carry out its obligations under the contract. 7. the contractor neglects or refuses to remove materials or to perform a new work that has been rejected as defective or unsuitable. 8. The contractor subcontracts any part of the contract works without approval by the procuring entity. Or 9. The contractor becomes bankrupt or insolvent, goes into liquidation. Administration, reorganization, winding up, or dissolution, becomes subject to the appointment of a liquidator, receiver, administrator, manager, or trustee. Enters into a composition or arrangement with the contractor's creditors. Or any act is done or any event occurs which is analogous to or has a similar effect to any of these acts or events under applicable laws. Government personnel should follow this provision closely to avoid procedural defects. Next slide. Shall terminate vs. may terminate, a real, deliberate difference. For infrastructure projects breach, Section 71. 4. 1. B. The uses the mandatory shall terminate once any listed condition is present. For goods, A, and consulting services, C, breach, the uses the discretionary may terminate. This is a real, deliberate difference in the actual accurate text of the not an inconsistency to smooth over. And not a distinction that should be flattened when advising on a specific case. Next slide. Termination due to force majeure. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 2. It states, A. In contracts for goods, the procuring entity may terminate the contract and impose liquidated damages when, as a result of force majeure, the supplier is unable to deliver or perform any or all of the goods, amounting to at least 10% of the contract price, for a period of not less than 60 calendar days, or earlier, as deemed necessary by the procuring entity. After receipt of the written notice from the procuring entity stating that the circumstance of force majeure is deemed to have ceased. B. In contracts for consulting services, the consultant is unable to deliver or perform a material portion of the outputs and deliverables for a period of not less than 60 calendar days. This rule is often a point of focus when verifying compliance with the law. Next slide. Termination for the procuring entity's convenience. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 3. It states, the procuring entity, by notice sent to the supplier, contractor, or consultant, may terminate the contract, in whole or in part, at any time, if it has determined the existence of any of the following conditions that make contract implementation economically, financially, or technically impractical or unnecessary. A. In the case of goods and consulting services, 1. If physical and economic conditions have significantly changed. 2. The hope has determined the existence of conditions that make project implementation impractical or unnecessary, such as, but not limited to, fortuitous event/s. Changes in laws and government policies. 3. Funding for the project has been withheld or reduced by higher authorities through no fault of the procuring entity. Or 4. Any circumstance analogous to the foregoing. B. In the case of infrastructure projects, 1. If physical and economic conditions have significantly changed. Or 2. The hope has determined the existence of conditions that make project implementation impractical or unnecessary. Keep this requirement in mind, as it directly affects the validity of the transaction. Next slide. Termination for unlawful acts. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 4. It states, the procuring entity may terminate the contract in case it is determined prima facie that the supplier, contractor, or consultant, including any joint venture partner therein, has engaged, before or during the implementation of the contract, in unlawful deeds and behaviors relative to contract acquisition and implementation. These unlawful acts include, but are not limited to, the following: A. Corrupt, fraudulent, collusive, and coercive practices. B. Drawing up or using forged documents. C. Using adulterated materials, means, or methods, or engaging in production contrary to rules of science or trade. Or D. Any other act analogous to the foregoing. This is a key provision that procurement officers must apply correctly. Next slide. Termination by contractor or consultant. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 5. It states, a. In contracts for infrastructure projects, the contractor may terminate its contract with the procuring entity if the works are completely stopped for a continuous period of at least 60 calendar days through no fault of its own, due to 1. Failure of the procuring entity to deliver, within a reasonable time, supplies, materials, right-of-way, or other items it is obligated to furnish. 2. Substantial failure of the procuring entity to perform its obligations, constituting a material breach. 3. Prolonged suspension by the procuring entity, through no fault of the contractor, affecting a substantial part of the project. Or 4. Disruption by adverse peace and order, certified by the AFP Provincial Commander and approved by the DND Secretary. B. In contracts for consulting projects, the consultant may terminate through written notice at least 30 calendar days prior, if, through no fault of its own, 1. The PE is in material breach unremedied within 60 days of notice, 2. Substantial failure of the PE to perform, or 3. Prolonged PE caused suspension. In case of termination, the procuring entity shall return to the consultant its performance security and unpaid claims. This detail is worth remembering when preparing supporting documents. Next slide. Grounds for termination, consolidated table. 1. Breach of contract, procuring entity, goods/CS, 10% of contract price undelivered. Infrastructure, 15% negative slippage, ongoing, or 10%, after contract time expired, or any of 9 listed conditions. 2. Force majeure, procuring entity, at least 10% of contract price affected, for 60+ calendar days. 3. Procuring entity's convenience, procuring entity, changed conditions, impracticality, or withheld funding. 4. Unlawful acts, procuring entity, prima facie corrupt/fraudulent/collusive practices, forged documents, adulterated materials. 5. By contractor, infrastructure, contractor, PE's failure to deliver items/RO, material breach, prolonged suspension, or peace and order disruption, for 60+ continuous days. 6. By consultant, consulting services, consultant, PE's material breach, unremedied after 60 days notice, substantial failure, or prolonged suspension. Requires 30-day advance written notice. Next slide. Procedures for termination of contracts. Legal basis, of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. The step-by-step process that must be followed once grounds for termination exist. Next slide. Verification. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. A. It states, upon receipt of a written report of acts or causes which may constitute grounds for termination as aforementioned, or upon its own initiative, the end user or implementing unit shall, within a period of 7 calendar days, verify the existence of such grounds and cause the execution of a verified report, with all relevant evidence attached. This provision is frequently checked during document review. Next slide. Notice to terminate. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. B. It states, upon recommendation by the end user or implementing unit, the HOPE shall terminate contracts only by written notice to the supplier, contractor, or consultant conveying the termination of the contract. The notice shall state, 1. That the contract is being terminated for any of the grounds aforementioned, and a statement of the acts that constitute the grounds constituting the same. 2. The extent of termination, whether in whole or in part. 3. An instruction to the supplier, contractor, or consultant to show cause as to why the contract should not be terminated. And 4. Special instructions of the procuring entity, if any. The notice to terminate shall be accompanied by a copy of the verified report. Please take note of this specific rule when reviewing procurement documents. Next slide. Show cause. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. C. It states, within a period of 7 calendar days from receipt of the notice of termination, the supplier, contractor, or consultant shall submit to the HOPE a verified position paper stating why the contract should not be terminated. If the supplier, contractor, or consultant fails to show cause after the lapse of the 7-day period, either by inaction or by default, the HOPE shall issue an order terminating the contract. This is an important requirement to check during a compliance review. Next slide. Rescission of the notice, and the HOPE's decision. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. D. and E. It states, D. Rescission of notice of termination, the procuring entity may, at any time before receipt of the supplier's, contractors, or consultant's verified position paper withdraw the notice to terminate if it is determined that certain items or works subject of the notice had been completed, delivered, or performed before the supplier's, contractors, or consultant's receipt of the notice. E. Decision, within a non-extendable period of 10 calendar days from receipt of the verified position paper, the HOPE shall decide whether or not to terminate the contract. It shall serve a written notice, and, unless otherwise provided, the contract is deemed terminated from receipt of the notice of the decision. The termination shall only be based on the grounds stated in the notice to terminate. Government personnel should follow this provision closely to avoid procedural defects. Next slide. The Contract Termination Review Committee, CTRC. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. F. It states, the HOPE may create a committee to assist him in the discharge of his/her/their function under these guidelines. All decisions recommended by the CTRC shall be subject to the approval of the HOPE. This rule is often a point of focus when verifying compliance with the law. Next slide. Takeover of contracts. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. G. It states, if a procuring entity terminates the contract due to default, insolvency, or for cause, it may enter into a negotiated procurement pursuant to Section 35, C, of RA No. 12,009 and this Keep this requirement in mind, as it directly affects the validity of the transaction. Next slide. Why this matters, takeover of contracts. Takeover is not automatic and does not require a separate competitive bidding for the remaining scope of work. The channels it directly into negotiated procurement under Section 35, C. This is the same negotiated procurement provision cross-referenced in the by administration/force account discussion, Part M, a procuring entity that terminates for default, insolvency, or cause has already made, sanctioned route to complete the project without a fresh public bidding. Next slide. The procuring entity's options, termination for convenience, goods. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6. H. It states, the goods that have been performed or are ready for delivery within 30 calendar days after the supplier's receipt of notice to terminate shall be accepted by the procuring entity at the contract terms and prices. For goods not yet performed or ready for delivery, the procuring entity may elect, 1. To have any portion delivered or performed and paid at the contract terms and prices, or 2. To cancel the remainder and pay to the supplier an agreed amount for partially completed or performed goods and for materials and parts previously procured by the supplier. This is a key provision that procurement officers must apply correctly. Next slide. Notice by contractor or consultant. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 71. 4. 6.1. It states, the contractor or consultant must serve a written notice to the procuring entity of its intention to terminate the contract at least 30 calendar days before its intended termination. The contract is deemed terminated if it is not resumed in 30 calendar days after the receipt of such notice by the procuring entity. This detail is worth remembering when preparing supporting documents. Next slide. Termination timeline, consolidated. 1. End user/implementing unit verifies grounds, executes verified report, 7 calendar days. 2. HOPE issues notice to terminate, with verified report attached, upon end user recommendation. 3. Contractor/supplier/consultant files verified position paper, show cause, 7 calendar days from notice receipt. 3a. PE may rescind the notice at any time before receiving the position paper, discretionary, no fixed deadline. 4. HOPE decides, 10 calendar days, non-extendable, from receipt of position paper. 5. Contract deemed terminated, upon receipt of the HOPE's decision notice, unless otherwise provided. Next slide. Termination documents checklist. Written report of acts/causes constituting grounds for termination, from any source, or the BAC/end user's own initiative. Verified report, end user/implementing unit, with all relevant evidence attached. Notice to terminate, stating the ground, extent, show cause instruction, and special instructions, with the verified report attached. Verified position paper, contractors/suppliers/consultants show cause response. Rescission of notice to terminate, if applicable. HOPE's written notice of decision. CTRC recommendation, if a CTRC was created. For takeover, documentation supporting the subsequent negotiated procurement under Section 35(c). Next slide. Why this matters. The 7-day show cause window under Section 71. 4.6(c) is structurally similar to, but legally distinct from, the show cause mechanism used in blacklisting proceedings, Section 104. 1a, see Part K. Both require the contractor to respond within a set window or face default consequences, but they are two entirely separate proceedings that may run independently. A contract can be terminated without automatically triggering blacklisting, and vice versa. Next slide. Completion, acceptance, and the certificates. How a contract actually reaches the final acceptance date that every warranty period in Part G is measured from. Next slide. 2 certificates, not 1. Certificate of completion, issued once the contractor has physically finished the work in accordance with the approved plans and specifications. In infrastructure practice, this typically follows a final inspection confirming the project is 100% physically accomplished. Certificate of final acceptance, issued after the procuring entity has reviewed the completed work, including any punch list or deficiency items identified at completion, and formally accepts the project as fully compliant with the contract. These are not interchangeable, and the distinction matters directly for this reference's own content, Part G's entire warranty framework, the 1-year defects liability period, and the 2/5/15-year structural defect liability periods, runs from final acceptance, not from physical completion. Next slide. Why the sequencing error is so common, and so consequential. A frequent audit finding is a warranty period tracked from the wrong date, typically from the date the contractor finished physical work, completion, rather than from the date the procuring entity actually accepted the project, final acceptance. Because the gap between these two dates can itself run months, particularly where punch list items require rework before acceptance can be issued. Using the wrong starting date can cause a warranty period to be treated as expired when it is not, or vice versa. This is the same date that Part O's audit observation O12 already flags as commonly mishandled, files closed and warranty security released at final acceptance without tracking the extended structural defects window that follows it. Next slide. An important note on the specific procedural steps. Procurement officers and auditors should refer to the applicable Government Procurement Policy Board issuances and the standard bidding documents for the specific procedures on this topic. Next slide. Audit observations, completion, and acceptance. 1. Warranty period computed from the certificate of completion date instead of the certificate of final acceptance date, understating the period the procuring entity is actually still protected. 2. Certificate of final acceptance issued despite unresolved punch list or deficiency items noted at the completion inspection, with no evidence the deficiencies were actually corrected first. 3. No certificate of final acceptance on file at all, leaving the warranty security release, Part G. 1, G. 6, and the final payment release, Part W, without a documented legal trigger. 4. Final acceptance issued on a date that precedes the actual physical completion date reflected in the contractor's own accomplishment reports, suggesting the certificate was backdated or issued without a genuine final inspection. Next slide. Warranty. Legal basis, of RA No. 12,009, Section 90, what protects government after a contract is completed and accepted. Next slide. Warranty for goods. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 90. 1. It states, for the procurement of goods, in order to assure that manufacturing defects shall be corrected by the supplier, a warranty security shall be required from the contract awardee for a minimum period of 3 months, in the case of expendable supplies, or a minimum period of 1 year. In the case of non-expendable supplies, after acceptance by the procuring entity of the delivered supplies, the obligation for the warranty shall be covered by either retention money in an amount equivalent to at least 1%, but not to exceed 5% of every progress payment, or a special bank guarantee equivalent to at least 1%, but not to exceed 5% of the total contract price. In the absence of a specified retention money or special bank guarantee percentage within the bidding documents or technical requirements, a default warranty rate of 1% of the total contract price shall be applied. This provision is frequently checked during document review. Next slide. Warranty for infrastructure, Phase 1, construction to final acceptance. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 90. 2. 1. It states, from the time project construction commenced up to final acceptance, the contractor shall assume full responsibility for the following. A. Any damage or destruction of the works except those occasioned by force majeure, and B. Safety, protection, security, and convenience of its personnel, third parties, and the public at large. Please take note of this specific rule when reviewing procurement documents. Next slide. Warranty for infrastructure, Phase 2, the defects liability period. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 90. 2. It states, 1 year from project completion up to final acceptance or the defects liability period, A. The contractor shall undertake the repair works, at its own expense, of any damage to the infrastructure on account of the use of materials of inferior quality, defects in the construction, or due to any violation of the terms of the contract, within 90 calendar days from the time the HOPE has issued an order to undertake repair. In case of failure or refusal to comply, the procuring entity shall undertake such repair works and shall be entitled to full reimbursement of expenses incurred upon demand. B. The defects liability period shall be covered by the performance security of the contractor required in Section 68 of this If the contractor fails to comply, the procuring entity shall forfeit its performance security, subject its properties to attachment or garnishment proceedings, and may impose the appropriate penalty under Sections 99, 100, and 101 of this This is an important requirement to check during a compliance review. Next slide. Structural defects, who is liable? This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 90. 2. 3. It states, the following persons shall be held responsible for structural defects or structural failures. 1. Contractor to where structural defects/failures arise due to faults attributable to improper construction, use of inferior quality/substandard materials, and any violation of the contract plans and specifications. 2. Consultants to where structural defects/failures arise due to faulty and/or inadequate design and specifications, as well as construction supervision. 3. Procuring entities representatives or project manager or construction managers and supervisors to in cases of willful intervention in altering the designs or negligence/omission in not approving or acting on proposed changes to noted defects. 4. Third parties to where caused by work such as leaking pipes, diggings or excavations, underground cables and electrical wires. And 5. Users to due to abuse or misuse, or non-compliance with technical design limits and/or intended purpose. Government personnel should follow this provision closely to avoid procedural defects. Next slide. Structural defects, how long the liability runs. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 90. 2. 3. Continued. It states, the warranty against structural defects and failures, except those occasioned by force majeure, shall begin from final acceptance until the following periods. 1. Permanent structures, 15 years, buildings of types 4 and 5 under the National Building Code, and other structures of steel/iron/concrete complying with relevant structural codes, such as steel or concrete bridges, flyovers, aircraft movement areas, ports, dams, tunnels, filtration and treatment plants, sewerage systems, power plants, transmission and communication towers, railway systems, and similar permanent structures. 2. Semi-permanent structures, 5 years, buildings of types 1, 2, and 3 under the National Building Code, concrete or asphalt roads, concrete river control, drainage, irrigation-lined canals, river landing, deep wells, rock causeway, pedestrian overpass, and similar. And 3. Other structures, 2 years, bailey and wooden bridges, shallow wells, spring developments, and similar structures. This rule is often a point of focus when verifying compliance with the law. Next slide. Warranty security schedule, infrastructure, structural defects. Procurement officers and auditors should refer to the applicable Government Procurement Policy Board issuances and the standard bidding documents for the specific procedures on this topic. Next slide. Warranty vs. Performance security vs. Bid security, a distinction worth drawing clearly. Bid security, posted at bid submission, guarantees the bid itself will not be improperly withdrawn. Performance security, posted before contract signing, Section 68, guarantees faithful performance during implementation, released upon the certificate of final acceptance. Warranty security, posted/retained after completion, Section 90, guarantees against defects discovered after acceptance, 3 months to 1 year for goods. 1 year, defects liability, plus up to 15 years, structural defects, infrastructure, after final acceptance. Next slide. Why this matters. The 15-year structural defect liability period for permanent structures is one of the most consequential, and most commonly overlooked figures in the entire for infrastructure audit purposes. A structural failure discovered a decade after a bridge's completion can still trigger contractor, consultant, or supervising official liability under Section 90. 2. 3. Provided it falls within this window and is attributable to one of the 5 listed categories of responsible parties. Next slide. Final payment, retention money, and release of securities. The natural endpoint of parts U, acceptance, and G, warranty, what has to be true before money and securities can actually be released. Next slide. Retention money, the accurate basis already in this reference. This is based on of RA No. 12,009, Section 90. 1. See Part G. 1. It states, the obligation for the warranty shall be covered by either retention money in an amount equivalent to at least 1%, but not to exceed 5%, of every progress payment, or a special bank guarantee equivalent to at least 1%, but not to exceed 5%, of the total contract price. In the absence of a specified retention money or special bank guarantee percentage within the bidding documents or technical requirements, a default warranty rate of 1%, 1%, of the total contract price shall be applied. Keep this requirement in mind, as it directly affects the validity of the transaction. Next slide. What has to be true before final payment? A certificate of final acceptance on file, Part U. Without it, there is no documented legal trigger for either the final payment or the release of the performance security. All progress payments already made and reconciled against the final statement of work accomplished, so the final payment reflects only the true remaining balance. No unresolved liquidated damages assessment, since Section 71. 1. 4. Part D. 1. Requires LD to be deducted from any money due, or which may become due, before that money is released. The performance security remains valid up to the certificate of final acceptance under Section 68. 6. Part B. 6. It is not released alongside the final payment itself, but only after final acceptance, and only if the procuring entity has no claims filed against it. Retention money, by contrast, converts into the warranty security under Section 90. 1. It is not simply refunded at final payment, it continues to secure the defects liability period established in Part G. Next slide. An important note on the final payment procedure itself. Procurement officers and auditors should refer to the applicable Government Procurement Policy Board issuances and the standard bidding documents for the specific procedures on this topic. Next slide. Audit observations, final payment, and release of securities. 1. Final payment released before the certificate of final acceptance was actually issued, or on the basis of a certificate of completion alone, see Part U. 1. 2. Performance security released simultaneously with final payment rather than being held until final acceptance is confirmed and no claims exist against it. 3. Retention money treated as automatically refundable at final payment instead of being carried forward as warranty security for the defects liability period. 4. Outstanding liquidated damages not deducted from the final payment before release, despite Section 71. 1. 4's requirement that such amounts be deducted from money due. 5. Final statement of work accomplished not reconciled against the sum of all prior progress payments, creating a risk of overpayment relative to actual physical accomplishment. 6. No documented basis for when accounts payable to the contractor was actually recognized in the books relative to the SWA, inspection report, and certificate of acceptance. See Part Z for the specific accounting determination this raises. Next slide. When does accounts payable to a contractor actually arise? The determination parts D, U, and G all converge on, and the one this reference's author has personally corrected Claude on before next slide. A different body of rules from the rest of this reference. Every other part in this reference is grounded in RA No. 12,009 and its the procurement law. The recognition of accounts payable, AP, in the books of account, by contrast, is fundamentally a government accounting question. Governed by the new government accounting system, NGAS, and COA's accounting and auditing rules, not by the procurement itself. This is why this part is framed differently from parts A through Y. It is not an accurate IRR citation, but a statement of the governing accounting principle. Cited to its own proper source discipline rather than borrowed from procurement law, it does not actually come from. Next slide. The common error, and the correct standard. A recurring audit error treats accounts payable to a contractor as arising simply from physical progress on the ground, for example, recording a payable once a contractor reports a given percentage of physical accomplishment, without more. The correct standard requires the convergence of several distinct documents, not physical progress alone. 1. The Statement of Work Accomplished, SWA, reflecting the specific measured extent of work actually completed. 2. The corresponding inspection report, through which the procuring entity's own inspectorate verifies that the SWA's claimed accomplishment is accurate and conforms to specifications. And 3. The Certificate of Acceptance, or, for the final billing, the Certificate of Final Acceptance, see Part U, through which the procuring entity formally accepts the accomplished work as compliant and payable. GPPA, Government Physical Progress of Accomplishment, or informal physical progress figures alone, without the SWA, the inspection report, and the acceptance step all in place, do not by themselves establish a valid, recordable accounts payable. Next slide. Why the convergence requirement matters. Recording AP prematurely, on physical progress alone, before the SWA is verified by inspection and the corresponding work formally accepted, creates a liability in the books for work that has not actually been confirmed to meet contract specifications, and that the government has not yet agreed to pay for. This connects directly to Part D's liquidated damages framework. LD is deducted from money due or which may become due, Section 71. 1. 4. A payable recorded before the underlying billing is actually verified and accepted risks releasing funds without the LD deduction that should have applied. It also connects to Part W's final payment sequencing, the same SWA inspection report acceptance convergence that governs a progress billing governs the final billing as well, with the certificate of final acceptance, Part U, serving as the acceptance step for the terminal payment. Next slide. An important note on the specific circular citation. Procurement officers and auditors should refer to the applicable Government Procurement Policy Board issuances and the standard bidding documents for the specific procedures on this topic. Next slide. Audit observations, recognition of accounts payable. 1. Accounts payable recorded on the basis of reported physical accomplishment percentage alone, without a corresponding statement of work accomplished, inspection report, and certificate of acceptance all on file. 2. Inspection report on file but dated after the accounts payable was already recorded in the books, indicating the payable was booked before verification actually occurred. 3. Final accounts payable recorded without the certificate of final acceptance, Part U, on file, leaving the terminal billing without its proper acceptance trigger. 4. Liquidated damages, Part D. 1. Not deducted from a recorded payable despite the underlying SWA period falling within an assessed delay, because the payable was processed on physical progress figures without cross-checking against the LD computation. 5. Discrepancy between the percentage of accomplishment claimed in the SWA and the percentage independently verified in the inspection report, with the payable recorded at the higher, unverified SWA figure. Next slide. Deadlines, delays, and technicalities. Termination and warranty are both built on strict, non-extendable windows. Miss one and the whole sequence becomes contestable. Next slide. Delayed issuance of the notice to terminate. Section 71. 4. 6a gives the end user or implementing unit 7 calendar days to verify grounds for termination and execute a verified report once a written report of possible grounds is received. This window is not a courtesy period. The entire termination sequence, including the contractor's own 7-day show cause window, only starts running once this step is properly completed. A delayed or missing verified report stalls the whole process and leaves the eventual termination vulnerable to challenge. Next slide. The HOPE's 10-day decision window is explicitly non-extendable. Section 71. 4. 6e states the HOPE's decision on termination must be made within a non-extendable period of 10 calendar days from receipt of the contractor's verified position paper. The word non-extendable is in the accurate text itself. This is one of the strictest deadlines anywhere in this reference. A decision issued after this window, even by 1 day, is a departure from the ER's own express terms. Next slide. Delayed certificate of final acceptance despite completed punch list items. Once punch list or deficiency items identified at completion have actually been corrected, an unreasonably delayed certificate of final acceptance does more than create paperwork lag. It delays the start of every warranty period clock in Part G, and correspondingly delays the release of final payment and the performance security. Treat a large, unexplained gap between physical completion and final acceptance as its own finding. Next slide. Missed 90-day structural defect repair window. Section 90. 2a gives a contractor 90 calendar days from the HOPE's repair order to correct a structural or workmanship defect. Missing this window is not a minor lapse. Section 101b makes failure to comply within this specific 90-day period a ground for blacklisting with perpetual disqualification. The most severe penalty tier in this entire guide. Any repair order compliance tracked past 90 days without escalation should be flagged immediately. Next slide. Final payment released too early, or withheld too long. Both directions carry risk. Releasing final payment before the certificate of final acceptance is actually confirmed, or before outstanding liquidated damages are deducted, creates exposure the government may not be able to recover. But indefinitely withholding a payment that the SWA inspection report acceptance convergence already supports, with no documented reason, is itself an audit finding. The convergence standard in Part Z is a trigger for payment, not an excuse to delay it once satisfied. Next slide. Misconceptions. 10 commonly held but legally inaccurate beliefs about termination, completion, warranty, and final payment. Next slide. On whether termination for breach is always discretionary. A common misconception is this: termination for breach of contract is always a discretionary choice the procuring entity can decline to exercise, even where the grounds clearly exist. The correct rule is as follows: for infrastructure projects specifically, Section 71. 4. 1b uses the mandatory shall terminate once any of the 9 listed conditions is present, not discretionary. Unlike the may terminate language for goods and consulting services breach under the same section. Next slide. On whether prior notice is required. A common misconception is this: a procuring entity can terminate a contract immediately upon discovering grounds, without any prior notice to the contractor. The correct rule is as follows: the requires a specific sequence first, a verified report, Section 71. 4. 6a, a notice to terminate stating the grounds, Section 71. 4. 6b, and a 7-day show cause opportunity for the contractor to respond, Section 71. 4. 6c, termination without this sequence is procedurally defective. Next slide. On silence during the show cause period. A common misconception is this: if a contractor simply does not respond to a show cause notice, the contract continues as if nothing happened until the procuring entity takes further action. The correct rule is as follows: Section 71. 4. 6c is explicit: failure to show cause after the 7-day period, by inaction or default, results in the HOPE issuing an order terminating the contract. Silence does not preserve the status quo. Next slide. On takeover requiring a fresh public bidding. A common misconception is this: when a contract is terminated and the procuring entity needs to take over the remaining work, a brand new competitive public bidding must be conducted for the remaining scope. The correct rule is as follows: Section 71. 4. 6g channels take over directly into negotiated procurement under Section 35c, a distinct mode that does not require a fresh competitive bidding process. Next slide. On when the warranty period actually starts. A common misconception is this: the warranty period begins the moment the contractor physically finishes the work. The correct rule is as follows: every warranty provision in Section 90 anchors to final acceptance, not physical completion. A certificate of completion and a certificate of final acceptance are distinct documents, and using the wrong one misstates the entire warranty timeline. Next slide. On retention money being simply refundable. A common misconception is this: retention money withheld from progress payments is simply refunded to the contractor once the project is done. The correct rule is as follows: Section 90. 1 converts retention money into warranty security. It continues to secure the defect's liability period rather than being automatically released at project completion. Next slide. On a single warranty period for all structures. A common misconception is this: all infrastructure projects carry the same warranty period regardless of what kind of structure was built. The correct rule is as follows: Section 90. 2. 3 sets 3 distinct structural defect liability periods based on classification: 15 years for permanent structures, 5 years for semi-permanent structures, and 2 years for other structures. Next slide. On final payment ending government's recourse. A common misconception is this: once final payment is released, the government has no further recourse against the contractor for problems that show up later. The correct rule is as follows: the structural defects liability period, up to 15 years for permanent structures, survives final payment entirely. It is a separate, ongoing obligation independent of the payment cycle. Next slide. On accounts payable arising from physical progress alone. A common misconception is this: accounts payable to a contractor can be recorded as soon as the contractor reports a given percentage of physical accomplishment. The correct rule is as follows: the correct standard requires convergence of the statement of work accomplished, the corresponding inspection report, and the certificate of acceptance. Physical progress reporting alone, without independent verification and formal acceptance, does not establish a valid, recordable payable. Next slide. On performance security and warranty security being the same thing. A common misconception is this: performance security and warranty security are just two names for the same instrument covering the same period. The correct rule is as follows: they are distinct. Performance security, Section 68, guarantees faithful performance during implementation and is released at final acceptance. Warranty security, Section 90, begins at that same final acceptance and covers defects discovered afterward, for a period that can run years longer. Next slide. Audit observations. 20 recurring compliance gaps in termination, takeover, completion, warranty, final payment, and accounts payable. Next slide. Termination procedure. 1. Termination proceeded without a verified report from the end user/implementing unit on file, Section 71. 4. 6a. 2. Notice to terminate missing one or more of its four required contents: the ground, the extent, the show cause instruction, or special instructions. 3. The contractor's 7 calendar day show cause period not observed before a default termination order was issued. 4. Hope's termination decision issued beyond the explicitly non-extendable 10 calendar day period, Section 71. 4. 6e. 5. Termination decision cited grounds beyond those originally stated in the notice to terminate, contrary to Section 71. 4. 6e. S limitation. 6. Takeover of the remaining work proceeded without documentation of the corresponding negotiated procurement under Section 35, c. 7. Termination for the procuring entity's convenience invoked without documenting which specific Section 71. 4. 3 condition actually applied. Next slide. Completion, acceptance, and warranty. 8. Force majeure termination invoked without the required 60 calendar day non-performance period being documented. 9. Certificate of completion treated as equivalent to certificate of final acceptance for warranty period computation purposes. 10. Certificate of final acceptance issued despite unresolved punch list or deficiency items noted at the completion inspection. 11. No certificate of final acceptance on file at all, leaving the warranty and final payment triggers undocumented. 12. Warranty security released at final acceptance without any system for tracking the extended structural defects liability window that follows it. 13. Structural defect repair not completed within the 90 calendar day compliance window, with no corresponding forfeiture or blacklisting action initiated. 14. Warranty security amount below the required 1 to 5% retention money or bank guarantee threshold under Section 90. 1. Next slide. Final payment in accounts payable. 15. Performance security released before final acceptance was actually confirmed and before all claims against it were cleared. 16. Final payment released without reconciling the final statement of work accomplished against the sum of prior progress payments. 17. Outstanding liquidated damages not deducted from the final payment before release, contrary to Section 71. 1. 4. 18. Accounts payable recorded on physical progress figures alone, without the SWA/inspection report/certificate of acceptance convergence in place. 19. Inspection report on file but dated after the corresponding accounts payable was already recorded in the books. 20. Structural defect liability period misclassified, for example. A semi-permanent structure tracked under the shorter 2-year other structures period instead of its correct 5-year period. Next slide. End of completion, termination, and warranty. Every quotation in this file is drawn directly from the text of the implementing rules and regulations of Republic Act No. 12,009, or from the specific GPPB/DPWH/COA source cited on its slide, cross-checked section by section. Award, eligibility, and commencement, contract implementation, money, time, and changes, disputes, protests, and reconsideration, and prohibited acts, contract terms. And reference continue. This references coverage of the remaining stages of the contract life cycle. This concludes this audio guide. Thank you for listening.